Isabella was an 8-year-old girl, with the typical innocence of childhood and her dreams still intact. Her easy smile and her curiosity about the world made her a child full of life. She liked the simple things, like playing in the park, watching her favorite cartoons, and dreaming about the future. To Isabella, the world seemed like a safe place, where the love of her parents was an invisible shield that protected her every step. But in a moment that no one could predict it, everything changed forever. That day, which had started like any other, turned into a nightmare. A devastating car accident happened on the road. An instant of chaos and silence, of twisted metal and broken glass. Isabella's parents, her safe haven and her reference, were taken from her in the blink of an eye, leaving behind an immense void and a girl who, for the first time, had to face what loss meant. The shock of the news spread like a shadow over Isabella's life. The moment he knew he would no longer see the faces he loved so much, his world came crashing down. The girl, who had previously run and smiled, stood still, as if time had stopped. The emptiness he felt was so great that it seemed to consume his heart. Sadness wasn't just an emotion. It was an overwhelming, heavy, suffocating force that invaded every corner of his existence. With the death of her parents, Isabella not only lost her family, she lost the security, stability, and future she had before her. Everything the child knew and loved disappeared in an instant, leaving only a bitter feeling of abandonment and loneliness. She had nowhere else to go. She no longer had the protection that gave her the courage to dream and grow. However, in the midst of the deep pain, there was still one last hope: Isabella's aunt. She was the only living relative, a distant but real link who could welcome her. When all seems to be lost, people often cling to any light, no matter how small, to move forward. For Isabella, her aunt was that last thread of hope, the possibility of rebuilding some kind of home and affection. The trip to Houston, Texas, where her aunt lived, was marked by a mixture of anxiety and insecurity. The girl, still incredulous with everything that happened, tried to understand that life would change forever, that her routine would no longer have her parents by her side, and that what awaited her was unknown. At that moment, the future seemed a distant, nebulous place, where fear and uncertainty mixed with a desire to find peace. The expectation was that her aunt, being family, would offer Isabella the love and care she needed so much. After all, blood bonding often carries with it a sense of responsibility and protection. But reality, as we know, does not always correspond to what the heart desires. Not always those who are close are the ones who really welcome. That void left by the loss of her parents, which seemed impossible to fill, was about to become even more painful. The promise of safe restart began to unravel, giving way to a new form of suffering. Isabella, with her eyes still so young and full of hope, little did she know that her journey was just beginning, and that the trials life had prepared for her would be even harder than the greatest tragedy she had ever faced. The initial shock of loss had already been too great for a girl that age. The life she knew had been torn away, and the hope she had once had in her aunt seemed to be the last chance for a different future. But fate sometimes proves cruel, and Isabella's innocence would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. And so, with her heart scarred by her parents' absence and a mind still trying to make sense of what happened, she took the first step into a new reality, a reality where love would be hard to find. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel to follow this moving trajectory full of twists and turns. Isabella arrived in Houston carrying in her chest a confusing mixture of fear and hope that only a lost child knows how to feel. Those new streets, the different climate, and the unfamiliar house should, at least, bring some comfort. After all, she was with the only person in the family who remained, her aunt, who could be the safe haven for that wounded soul. But as she crossed the threshold of that door, the girl began to realize that the promise of love and protection she had longed for was very far from being fulfilled. Instead of a warm hug, Isabella received her aunt's cold silence. The environment that awaited her had no room for the lightness and care that a child needs to heal. The home, which in his childish mind should be a refuge, was actually a space full of rigidity, demands, and a glaring absence of affection. The girl soon understood that her role would be different. Not that of a needs to be cared for, but that of a silent maid, invisible and always available. Isabella's mornings began to feel like an endless cycle of heavy chores and harsh orders. There was no time for play, for the dream that still pulsated inside her. There was no room for school, for learning, or simply for being a child. Each day was an exhausting sequence of household chores, cleaning, cooking, tidying, washing, while free time faded away. The girl worked until her body complained, but her aunt didn't see that. For her, Isabella was nothing more than a useful tool, a resource to be explored. What hurt the most was not only the hard work, but the way she was treated. The humiliations were constant, like small blades that cut the little self-esteem that was still left in the girl. Isabella heard harsh words, cold looks, gestures that drove away any demonstration of affection. The presence of the aunt, who should be comfort, became a source of fear and insecurity. The home she imagined to be a safe haven was actually an invisible prison. This scenario, so far from what a child needs to grow up healthy, began to shape a different Isabella, a girl who, despite all the pain, still kept a spark of hope, still believed that there could be something better beyond those cold walls. But at the same time, his childhood was slowly being stolen. The school, with its friends and teachers, remained only in thought, a distant and painful memory of what had been denied to it. Isabella found herself isolated not only physically, but emotionally. Without affection, without reference to love, what remained was a strength that only those who face great adversity can find within themselves. The girl began to learn by force that to survive in that new home she needed to be strong, silent, and obedient, even if her heart was broken. The contrast between the hope that brought her there and the harsh reality she lived was too cruel for a child. Time passed, and with it, the years stole more than Isabella's childhood. The marks of that house were getting deeper in his soul, each day more difficult to erase. The girl, who was once full of dreams, began to understand that the adult world is not always fair, and that sometimes the love that is expected is not where it should be. It was a painful and early learning experience, which forced her to grow up too fast. In that house, Isabella was not a child, nor a niece, nor a human being with feelings. She was a maid, a shadow who needed to fulfill her role without questioning, without sketching a smile or a gesture of weakness. The warmth and coziness, which everyone needs to develop, were just empty words in his dictionary. The absence of affection created an immense emptiness, which made each night seem endless and lonely. Despite everything, Isabella never gave up completely. Inside her, a spark persisted, a silent will to resist and survive. This strength, although still fragile, was his only weapon in that scenario. Even when the tears came hidden, even when her body ached from working so hard, she kept to herself the hope that one day her life could be different. It was a feeling as delicate as it was necessary, the last bridge to something greater than the present suffering. In this hostile environment, every gesture of affection that Isabella tried to pursue was rejected. The girl learned to hide, not to ask for help, not to show her emotions so as not to attract more aggression. The lack of school and contact with other children made her world even more restricted and silent. What was once a life full of possibilities was now a cycle of endless tasks, of cold nights and long days, where the word childhood seemed impossible. Thus, time followed its course, and Isabella grew up in the midst of pain and abandonment. The girl who had once been full of dreams began to understand, long before her age, what the cruelty of the real world was. But what seemed like the end of a story full of hope was actually the beginning of a trajectory marked by unimaginable challenges. Challenges that would make her find strength where no one expected it, and discover paths that would change her life forever. And it is exactly at this point, when the darkness seemed greater, that Isabella's life is about to intersect with unexpected fates, harsh revelations, and a silent struggle that goes far beyond what could be imagined. Time seemed to slip slowly within those cold, silent walls that Isabella called home, though everything there had little of home and much of an invisible prison. The 8-year-old girl, who had arrived full of hope and dreams, now found herself involved in a suffocating routine that did not resemble the childhood she was supposed to live. The days dragged on like an endless succession of tasks, each heavier and more exhausting than the last, and what little energy was left was consumed by a deep, silent loneliness. Waking up early did not mean waking up to a new day full of possibilities, but the beginning of a tiring journey, marked by forced labor, that seemed to have no end. Isabella swept, cleaned, washed, cooked, made the house run almost by itself, while her aunt watched, demanding even more without even offering a gesture of recognition or a smile. The body of that girl, who was still to grow and be strengthened with play and affection, was treated as a tool for the maintenance of the house, an instrument at the service of duty and obligation. The small hands, which were supposed to hold pencils and colored drawings, were calloused by the harshness of service. The eyes that should be enchanted by books and stories were tired and dull, the result of sleepless nights and days marked by exhaustion. The school, which should have been a refuge and a portal to a different future, was a denied dream, something distant and unattainable, making even more evident the emptiness that house imposed. Social isolation came not only from the lack of contact with other children, but from the complete absence of opportunities to be who she really was, a child. Isabella had no time to play, to laugh, to learn. His days were measured in service and order, and his voice had almost no room to express itself. Loneliness became her only constant companion, an emotional emptiness, a shadow that followed her wherever she went inside the house. The girl not only lost her childhood, but her own identity, dissolved in tasks that exhausted her physically and emotionally in a cruel cycle that seemed to have no end. The consequences of that heavy and lonely life began to manifest themselves in quiet but profound ways. The body still in development suffered from wear and tear, physical health weakened, and the mind carried the weight of sadness and lack of prospects. The isolation was not only physical, but an emotional prison that had prevented Isabella from connecting, expressing herself, feeling loved and protected. His stolen childhood left invisible marks, scars that only time and a lot of strength could soften. Each day inside the house was a silent battle to keep hope alive, to resist the pain of rejection and indifference. Even when fatigue seemed unbearable, when discouragement threatened to overwhelm, Isabella found forces hidden somewhere within herself, forces she didn't yet know how important they would be to the challenges that lay ahead. This resistance, however small and silent, was the spark that kept her alive, that prevented her spirit from being completely extinguished. What for many would be a safe home, for Isabella was an invisible cell, where time seemed to drag on too slowly and freedom was only a distant memory. The girl grew up imprisoned not only by the rigidity of the rules, but by the weight of the absence of affection, which made her feel invisible and unwanted. That hostile environment shaped her character and her worldview, forcing her to mature prematurely, in a solitude that few can imagine. Despite all this, there was within Isabella's silent will a tenuous but persistent hope that refused to be extinguished. It was a confusing feeling, sometimes hidden between the tears and the lonely nights, but it pulsed strongly enough to keep her breathing, to keep her dreaming of something beyond that cruel reality. It was the strength needed to endure what seemed impossible, what was yet to come, and what, one day, could transform her forever. Thus, in that scenario of abandonment and forced labor, Isabella was not just an exhausted girl working. She was a silent symbol of resistance, a soul still young, but already marked by life, who struggled not to get lost in the emptiness that surrounded her. The stolen childhood and isolation were not just a momentary suffering, but the foundations of the hard story that girl's life was about to write, a story that not everyone knows, but that few can forget. And it is in this dark and pain-laden environment that Isabella's trajectory begins to take on even more difficult and challenging contours, where her aunt's choices and the paths that life would trace intertwine in a cruel and unexpected way. At the age of 12, Isabella's life took an even darker and more unbelievable turn, something that surpassed all the limits of cruelty and injustice that she had known until then. Up to that point, she had already faced rejection, exhausting work, and painful loneliness inside her aunt's Houston home. But what would come next, no one could have foreseen, not even the girl, who already carried such a heavy weight on her shoulders for her young age. The deepest and most devastating betrayal was about to happen, forever changing the fate of that child who never asked to be there. Being sold was not just a cruel expression. It was a brutal reality, an illegal and inhumane transaction that turned Isabella into an object of exchange, into a commodity in the hands of those who were supposed to protect her. In the eyes of her aunt, the girl went from being a relative to being a source of profit, a property that could be handed over to whoever paid the right amount. This act not only violated all laws, but tore apart what little was left of that child's dignity and hope. The illegal sale was not just a financial issue. It was a silent sentence that put Isabella in an even more vulnerable position, in a house where the chance of being heard or protected was almost non-existent. The new residence, an imposing mansion in Los Angeles, reflected a completely different reality from the one Isabella had known, but that did not mean an improvement in her condition. On the contrary, the luxury around her only highlighted the contrast between the wealth and the emotional abandonment she suffered. There, she was not a child welcomed. She was a servant without rights, an invisible being who needed to follow orders, obey without question, always under constant fear of even more cruel punishments and humiliations. What might seem to many a place of opportunity was actually a new prison, more sophisticated but equally oppressive. In this new home, Isabella continued to be deprived of what she needed most: affection and education, freedom to be a child. She spent her days subjected to a strict regime of domestic chores, with no rest, no time to play or to dream. The few words he exchanged were not affection, but harsh orders, reprimands, and veiled threats that kept his mind always alert and his body in constant tension. The girl quickly learned that questioning or resisting could mean even harsher consequences, an invisible punishment that manifested itself in emotional and physical forms that were difficult to describe. In addition to the exhausting routine, the isolation was even greater. The family that received her did not care about her emotional well-being or her development, and Isabella did not have access to schools, doctors, or any type of support that could guarantee a minimally healthy childhood. The vulnerability she already felt when she lost her parents and was rejected by her aunt was amplified in an environment where dignity was constantly denied, and fear became the only constant feeling. Each day was a challenge to survive, not to lose hope in the midst of so many shadows. This cruel picture was a sad reflection of what many children face in silence, away from the eyes of the world. Isabella, with her story, has become a symbol of those voices that are silenced and of lives that are negotiated in exchange for money. The pain of the betrayal was deep, because it came from someone who should be her safe haven, her family, and who, instead, gave her childhood into the hands of strangers who had no intention of taking care of her with love or respect. But even in the midst of this horror, there was something about Isabella that still resisted, a faint glow that could not be erased. It was as if, despite everything, the girl managed to hold a small flame of hope which pulsed silently in her chest, preventing her from completely losing herself in the darkness. This resistance, though invisible, was a foundation on which the steps it would take later would be built. Difficult steps, but essential to changing its destiny. The complexity of this new phase of Isabella's life reveals a dark side of reality, a drama that few people know about, but that needs to be told so that other voices can be heard. The illegal sale of a child is a profound violation of human rights, a crime that leaves physical and emotional scars that take years to heal, if they ever disappear at all. And in this scenario, every gesture, every look, every word said or silenced carries an immense weight, which can determine the course of that little human being. As Isabella tried to survive in that hostile environment, life continued to take its course. But for her, the future seemed increasingly uncertain and dangerous. What few imagined was that, despite the almost impossible barriers, inside that girl there was an even greater strength, a hidden potential that only needed to be awakened, a force that, at some point, would come to the fore and change the story forever, showing that not even the deepest darkness can completely extinguish the light of hope. And so, wrapped in a cruel reality full of challenges, Isabella continued a journey that many could never imagine. Her story was not only one of pain, but also of silent resistance, of a will to live and to transform what seemed impossible into a chance for a new beginning. Isabella was now at a crossroads that many adults would never have imagined facing. With each new day inside that mansion in Los Angeles, the weight of abandonment and exploitation seemed to grow, trying to crush the last spark of hope that still pulsated within her. The luxurious environment did not hide the cruelty, nor did it soften the cold that took her heart. On the contrary, it made even more evident the contrast between what the girl deserved and what she received. The routine, now dictated by a family that had bought it as if it were a thing, was marked by incessant orders, exhausting tasks, and a stifling surveillance. There was no room for error or doubt, and any sign of weakness was promptly punished with silence or contempt. But despite all this, something inside Isabella was beginning to awaken in the darkness of that oppressive world. She began to realize that the only possible way out was to find strength within herself. He could no longer count on anyone, and if he wanted to survive, he would have to resist, even if the pain was unbearable and the fear constant. Each day, she faced challenges that seemed insurmountable to a child, but she discovered a silent, almost invisible resistance that kept her going. This strength did not come from something external, but from the deep desire not to be defined by the cruelty that surrounded her, by the silent desire to one day be able to be free and master of her own destiny. Isabella learned to hide her pain with a neutral countenance, to respond to orders quickly and accurately, to avoid questions and any attitude that could arouse even more aggressiveness. This adaptation was a form of protection, an armor that kept her alive in the midst of so much psychological violence. But inside that mask, his heart still held memories, dreams, and a hope that refused to die. The girl began to understand that, despite the circumstances, her essence remained intact, and that this essence was her greatest weapon against the darkness. Fear was a constant companion. It was a fear of punishment, of harsh words, of complete abandonment. It was a fear of losing all that was left of his humanity. But, paradoxically, this fear also pushed her to be cautious, not to give up, to look for small gaps where she could breathe a little, even if it was for seconds. Every small victory, whether he managed to keep a smile or managed to avoid severe punishment, was celebrated internally as a triumph over cruel fate he tried to impose on him. Despite the absence of affection and the harsh reality in which she lived, Isabella found in books, hidden in some forgotten corner of the house, a refuge for her mind and soul. Each page read was a momentary escape into worlds where goodness still existed, where children had the right to play and dream. These moments of reading brought comfort and fueled that faint flame of hope that, against all odds, continued to shine within her. It was there, among the printed words, that the girl began to build a small universe where she could imagine a different future, where she was not just a victim, but a protagonist of her own story. Loneliness, which could have been her greatest enemy, began to transform into a space for reflection and self-knowledge. Over time, Isabella developed an acute awareness of the reality around her, understanding that she needed to be stronger, smarter, to survive. The pain and humiliation, while constant, could not erase her sense of self, nor her quiet determination not to let that situation define who she was. And so, even on the most difficult days, in the midst of tears that no one saw, Isabella found the strength to continue, to resist. Isabella's daily struggle was made up of small steps, almost invisible but profound. Every task accomplished, every moment of silence endured, every night she held back tears in the dark was a battle won against oppression. This silent resistance was her way of telling the world, and herself, that there was still life there, that the child was not completely lost, even when it seemed invisible to the eyes of those who were supposed to protect it. The intensity of the struggle made Isabella become, little by little, a survivor not only physically, but emotionally. Although his body was attached to that house, his mind and spirit began to free themselves from the bonds of fear, gaining an inner strength that few could imagine in someone so young. This strength, still fragile, was what gave her the courage to face each new day, to get up even when everything seemed to conspire against her. Behind that thin, silent girl was an indomitable desire to be more than a victim, to break the invisible chains that bound her. It was a fire that burned slowly, but once lit, it would have the power to illuminate paths that seemed impossible. Isabella's story, marked by suffering and abandonment, began to gain contours of resistance and hope, showing that, even in the cruelest circumstances, life can surprise with capacity for regeneration. And so, in the midst of that dark scenario, the girl moved on, secretly nurturing the dream of one day being able to rewrite her destiny, leaving behind the shadows that tried to stifle her light. Isabella's resistance was not just a matter of survival, but a silent cry of courage, a silent promise that, despite everything, she still believed in a different future. That girl's journey, marked by pain and struggle, still reserved many difficult chapters, but also showed that inner strength, even when almost invisible, can transform anyone's story. And as the clock ran its relentless course, Isabella continued to walk this arduous path, discovering day after day that the greatest battle, the one against fear and abandonment, could be won with the one weapon no one could ever take away from her, her own courage. The dawn of that day, marked by the usual routine of obligations and silence, brought a twist that Isabella could never have imagined. For years, the girl had been invisible in the eyes of society, a specter that carried in body and soul the scars of abandonment and abuse. But that morning, an unexpected presence crossed a path that seemed to have no way out, forever changing the destiny that seemed to be reserved for her. A social worker, moved by complaints and signs that began to emerge, entered that house with the mission of breaking the silence that imprisoned Isabella, seeing in those walls not only a luxury residence, but a prison where a child suffered in total isolation. The impact of that rescue was immediate and profound. For Isabella, who had lived for years under an almost eternal shadow of fear and submission, the arrival of that figure represented the first glimmer of real hope since her life had taken such a cruel turn. The mere fact that someone looked at her with compassion and urgency was able to awaken long-forgotten emotions that, despite the trauma, still had room to grow. The act of finally being recognized as a victim, as a human being with rights and dignity, opened a door that until then seemed locked forever. Leaving that house, where every corner carried painful memories, was accompanied by a mixture of relief and insecurity. Isabella, accustomed to controlling her every move to avoid punishment, found herself facing a new world, where the rules were different and the possibility of living a true childhood was beginning to take shape. The move to a shelter, a space where there were other children, care, adequate food, and access to education, brought an initial shock, but also a chance for reconstruction that she had never known. This new environment, although far from the perfect ideal, offered something crucial: the security and support necessary for this girl to finally begin to heal. The first few days were a mixture of confusion and relief. Isabella needed to learn to trust again, to understand that she would not be punished for crying or for showing her emotions. Gradually, the shelter became a place where she could allow herself to feel and express her pain, traumas, and also her little dreams. The constant presence of dedicated professionals, of other young people with similar stories of struggle, helped to weave a support network that contrasted violently with the isolation and indifference of the previous home. The girl began to rediscover the value of friendship, affection, and hope, elements that had been absent for too long. This rescue represented more than a simple change of address for Isabella. It was a starting point of trajectory of transformation and reconstruction. The pain of the past has not disappeared, nor could it, but the possibility of a different future has opened up before it, illuminating previously invisible paths. The girl, who had been deprived of a dignified childhood, began to receive education, medical care, and the necessary accompaniment to face and overcome the accumulated traumas. The contact with other young people and specialized professionals allowed her to begin to understand the depth of the suffering she experienced, but also to discover that she was not alone and that it was possible to get back on her feet. This new chapter in Isabella's life brought challenges, of course, as the healing process is never linear or easy. Living in the shelter, although more humane, required her to constantly adapt, build new relationships, and face the memories that insisted on coming back on a daily basis. However, the mere fact of no longer being under the yoke of those hands that treated her as property was, in itself, a huge step towards freedom. The girl began to build herself from the ruins that the past had left, with a strength that surprised even professionals who accompanied her. The rescue did not erase what happened, but it made Isabella able to begin to transform pain into learning, fear into courage, and loneliness into a search for belonging and love. It was the first time in a long time that someone believed in it, fought for it, and offered real opportunity for rebuilding. The journey of recovery that began would not be easy, but it was, in short, a trajectory with hope, where the girl could imagine a future where the word childhood was not a lost concept, but a possible reality. In this new phase, Isabella was no longer a silent victim, but a symbol of human resilience, of the ability to reinvent oneself even after the worst adversities. The history that seemed destined to be marked by pain and submission began to take on contours of resistance and rebirth. The shelter, with all its challenges, was fertile ground for this transformation, a place where the girl could finally breathe, learn, and dream. The turning point that this rescue represented for Isabella opened the door to a series of internal and external discoveries. She was beginning to understand that the world outside, although imperfect and full of difficulties, could be a place where life was still worth living. This perception, delicate and at the same time powerful, prepared the ground for her to begin to question, to seek justice and, above all, to build a new identity, free from the shadows that haunted her. Isabella's recovery was a slow and delicate process, where every small step had enormous meaning. The simple act of going to school, making friends, having access to adequate food, and consistent medical care came to represent monumental achievements in his life. These seemingly simple changes carried with them the essence of the dignity that had been denied to him for so long. In the midst of this scenario, the girl began to glimpse the possibility that childhood, although stolen, could be recovered, rebuilt with the tools of hope and the right support. The rescue, more than a physical act of withdrawal, was a true redemption for Isabella. It represented the breaking of a brutal cycle, the beginning of a journey where she would no longer be defined by suffering, but by the strength of her recovery. The girl who had once been sold as an object was now recognized as a person, with rights, dreams, and potential to get back on her feet. The importance of this moment for her life cannot be underestimated, as it was in it that the seed of transformation was planted. Despite all the brutality she faced, Isabella showed an impressive ability to resist and rebuild herself. Hope, although fragile, began to take hold of her heart, paving the way for her to one day not only overcome the past, but also use her experience to help other children who were still suffering in silence. This cycle of rescue and reconstruction was, for her, living proof that pain can turn into strength and that life, even the most difficult circumstances, can surprise with new beginnings. And so, in that shelter where the light began to break through the darkness that surrounded her life, Isabella prepared herself for a new stage, where each step would be a victory against the past, and each achievement an affirmation of her ability to be reborn. Her story, which seemed to have been written by injustice and suffering, began to be rewritten with the inks of courage, dignity, and renewed hope. It was the beginning of a journey that would still have many challenges, but which clearly showed that destiny can be changed, even when all seems lost. Isabella's life was about to enter a new phase, where the strength she found within herself and the support she received would be essential to face the next chapters of this trajectory. In the shelter, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and stories marked by pain, Isabella felt a faint hope being born, like a ray of sunlight filtering through dense clouds. Among the adults who crossed her path, one of them stood out with a different presence, a light that did not go out in the face of difficulties, and a firm belief in the hidden potential of that girl. She was a woman who, for Isabella, would become not only a guide, but a true mentor, able to see beyond the wounds and recognize the strength that still pulsated inside. This woman did not see Isabella as just another child in a situation of vulnerability. She saw a soul ready to be awakened, a talent to be polished, a history to be transformed. The relationship that began between them became a refuge and a constant source of encouragement. While the world seemed to have denied her so many opportunities, this mentor offered the girl not just words, but concrete actions. It was a presence that listened, that understood the depth of invisible pain, and that at the same time encouraged Isabella to look to the future with different eyes full of possibilities, with patience and dedication. This woman helped Isabella to see that, despite the scars of the past, there was a unique glow within her, an ability to overcome that few could imagine. The impact of this influence was profound and immediate. For the first time, Isabella began to believe that education was not just an obligation, but a powerful tool capable of changing her reality. The mentor opened doors, presented paths, connected the girl to opportunities that previously seemed unattainable. Through her support and guidance, Isabella won scholarships in schools that offered not only quality education, but also welcome and emotional support, essential aspects for those who brought such a heavy baggage. These achievements, which for many would be common steps, for Isabella represented true milestones in her journey, clear signs that destiny could indeed be rewritten. Over time, Isabella began to discover the pleasure of learning, the joy of feeling capable, the pride of achieving small and big goals. Each class attended, each open book, each concept understood was a victory over the silence that imprisoned her. The mentor was present at each of these stages, celebrating the advances, and offering support in the face of inevitable obstacles. This support network strengthened not only the girl's intellect, but also her self-esteem, helping her to rebuild an identity that took her out of the role of victim to put her in the place of protagonist of her own story. The learning process was more than academic. It was an exercise in resilience and emotional reconstruction. The mentor taught that knowledge was a powerful weapon against the injustice that Isabella had experienced, a way to guarantee her autonomy and freedom. Under her guidance, the girl came to understand that education could be the passport to a world where she would no longer be defined by her past, but by the choices she would make from that moment on. The dream that once seemed distant began to become palpable, and the desire to transform her life gained an irresistible force. The scholarships won open spaces that were previously only imagined. Schools with resources, prepared teachers, and a welcoming environment began to be the new scenario of Isabella's life, a place where she could not only learn, but also feel safe to be who she really was. The girl, who for so long had lived between cold walls and indifferent looks, discovered that the world could offer something different, a space where her talents were valued and her potential explored. This did not erase the pain she carried, but began to show that life was much more than suffering, that there was light even in the shadows. With each step taken at school, Isabella consolidated a new relationship with knowledge and with the world around her. The mentor, in addition to being a guide, has become a living inspiration, an example that believing in others can transform destinies. The girl learned that the right support, coming at the right time, can be decisive in breaking vicious cycles of abandonment and fear. This trust placed in her strengthened her resolve and fueled an inner flame that could never be extinguished again. As time passed, the opportunities multiplied. Invitations to participate in projects, workshops, and extracurricular activities began to pour, broadening Isabella's horizons and giving her the chance to develop skills that went far beyond the traditional classroom. This expansion of the girl's personal universe allowed her to see a possible future, full of paths and choices. A future where the word limit seemed to lose its weight. The mentor was a link between Isabella and these new worlds, a bridge built with affection, effort, and a lot of faith in the young woman's potential. Isabella felt, for the first time, that her story would not only be written by the pain she faced, but also by the achievements she began to accumulate. The walk in the shelter, which at first seemed like a temporary shelter from chaos, turned into a starting point for a life full of possibilities. Education became his weapon, his shield, and his hope. The girl, who so often had to silence her voice to survive, now found in learning a powerful way to express her value and strength. This transformation was neither quick nor easy, but it was authentic and profound. Each achievement represented a small victory over the past. Each advance was an affirmation that the future could be different. The power of support in education revealed itself as a transforming agent, capable of healing wounds that seemed incurable. Isabella, once invisible, began to become a protagonist of her own narrative, capable of dreaming and acting to build a dignified and meaningful life. The encounter with this mentor changed the course of Isabella's life, bringing to the surface a force that was dormant and that needed only a stimulus to flourish. The influence of this woman was fundamental for the girl to not only survive, but also to develop and plan a future where hope and dignity were more than empty words. The rescue of body and soul gained a new ally in education, which became the path to freedom and personal fulfillment. Isabella began to understand that her life could have other outcomes, that the opportunities offered to her could be the springboard to a new beginning. The mentor's constant presence was a daily reminder that someone believed in her, that her potential was real, and that past circumstances didn't have to determine her future. This certainty strengthened the girl and prepared her for the challenges that were yet to come, with the confidence of someone who has already started to walk a different road. As the relationship between Isabella and her mentor deepened, the girl began to experience an inner transformation that overflowed into all areas of her life. The support she received not only opened external doors, but also broke down internal barriers, allowing her to face her fears, insecurities, and traumas with new perspective. Education and emotional support went hand in hand, creating a solid foundation for Isabella to be able to rise even in the face of adversity. This process not only changed Isabella's view of herself, but also began to alter the way the world perceived her. The girl who was previously seen only as a victim is now recognized as a determined, capable and full of potential young woman. This change in perception was crucial for her to be able to access even more opportunities and position herself with confidence in the face of the challenges that arose. The internal transformation, guided by the mentor, was reflected in each achievement, no matter how small. And so, that girl who had been sold, ignored, and mistreated began to write a new story. A story of overcoming, struggle, and, above all, hope. The power of support and education proved to be the common thread that tied the broken pieces of his life together and gave him the chance to build something new and valuable. The past, although present, was no longer the only protagonist. The future, full of possibilities, began to gain voice and space. Isabella knew that the journey would be long and full of obstacles, but now she had an ally who believed in her, a path illuminated by knowledge and the certainty that it was possible to change. The strength she found within herself, combined with the mentor's support, became the foundation of her reconstruction. It was the beginning of a new chapter, where the girl who was once sold and forgotten began to blossom, ready to face the world with courage and determination. Isabella's transformation would not only be a personal victory, but a living example of what the power of human support and education can accomplish. This crucial meeting between the mentor and the girl opened doors to a future that previously seemed unreachable, showing that, even in the darkest situations, hope can be rekindled and life can be rewritten with courage and love. Her story, marked by pain, began to turn into an inspiring testimony of overcoming and resilience, which would echo far beyond the walls of the shelter where everything began to change. Isabella's trajectory was marked by challenges that seemed insurmountable, but which she faced with unwavering determination. Each obstacle overcome at school represented not only a personal victory, but a crucial step towards the realization of dreams that one day seemed impossible. The path to graduation in business administration was not easy. It involved long nights of studying, doubts that kept popping up, and sometimes the weight of insecurity trying to undermine their confidence. Even so, Isabella maintained her firm purpose of transforming her life through education, seeing it the key that would open doors to a dignified and promising future. In the school environment, Isabella had to learn to deal with many differences, from the initial gap in relation to other students to the need to overcome veiled prejudice and accumulated fatigue. Each day was a challenge to stay focused and committed, but also an invitation to grow and prove to herself that she was capable of going beyond what anyone could imagine. With each work delivered, with each test carried out, the girl who once lived on the margins of society reaffirmed her capacity and her will to change her own history. Graduation would not only be the end of the stage, but the celebration of a journey built with effort, courage, and an immense will to win. During this period, Isabella gained much more than technical knowledge. She developed leadership, organization, and strategic vision skills, characteristics that were honed over time and that prepared her to take on increasingly greater challenges. The achievement of scholarships, the recognition of professors, and the involvement in academic projects transformed this path into something far beyond simple formal learning. It was a process of maturation, self-knowledge, and strengthening of a self-esteem that seemed to have been buried by the past. Over the years, Isabella has taken every opportunity to stand out and expand her horizons. She participated in internships, lectures, and events that connected her with the job market, paving the way for her to think about a broader future full of possibilities. The idea of creating his own company began to take shape at this stage, motivated by the desire to not only change his life, but also contribute something meaningful to the world. Her interest in technology and sustainability, topics that were becoming increasingly urgent and relevant, sparked a passion in her that would soon become the main focus of her career. Building a sustainable technology company was not a random choice, but a reflection of everything Isabella experienced and learned along her journey. She wanted to create solutions that could help other people and communities, especially those facing similar difficulties to the ones she overcame. The determination to use innovation to promote a positive impact on society became the mission that guided his steps. Thus, the young entrepreneur began to invest her time and energy in research, partnerships, and the development of projects that combine technical knowledge and social commitment. The process of entrepreneurship brought new challenges, but also countless rewards. Isabella had to learn to deal with market pressure, management demands, and the natural uncertainties of any business. However, The strength built during her academic and personal trajectory served as a solid foundation for her to face these situations with resilience and creativity. The company started small with few resources, but with a clear purpose and an inspiring vision. Each achievement, no matter how small, nourished confidence and reinforced the certainty that this was the right path. Isabella's pride in her graduation was not only for the diploma she had earned, but for all the meaning it carried. It was concrete proof that, despite the adversities, she managed to break cycles and build a successful trajectory. This achievement reverberated far beyond the walls of the school, reaching everyone who accompanied it, especially those who believed in it from the beginning. The ceremony was a moment of celebration, emotion, and recognition, where each step taken in the past gained meaning and value. Looking back, Isabella saw not only the difficult moments, but also the people who were part of her journey, the opportunities that arose, and the inner strength that sustained her. Graduation symbolized a new beginning, a starting point for greater challenges, and even more significant achievements. The young woman was ready to take her place in the world of business and technology, armed with knowledge, experience, and the certainty that she could make a difference. The sustainable technology company began to gain prominence thanks to the innovation of the projects and the social impact it promoted. Isabella was intensely dedicated to ensuring that each solution developed was not only efficient, but also aligned with ethical and environmental values. This commitment transformed his business into something that went beyond profit, becoming a tool for social and environmental transformation. The young entrepreneur came to be seen as a reference, an example that personal overcoming can be converted into a contribution to a better world. At the same time that she consolidated her career, Isabella continued to reinvent herself, always seeking to improve her knowledge and expand her network of contacts. The trajectory that began in the midst of abandonment and pain turned into a story of determination and success that inspired those who knew her. Each challenge overcome reinforced the confidence to face the next, creating a spiral of continuous growth. The girl who was once saved by a social worker and believed by a mentor was now able to save and inspire other lives. The path taken by Isabella showed that true strength lies in the ability to get back on your feet and transform suffering into learning and fulfillment. Her story was a living testament to the power of resilience, right support, and education to break down barriers and open doors. Graduation, academic achievements, and the construction of the company represented, above all, the victory of determination over adverse circumstances, proof that a better future is possible for those who are willing to fight for it. The doors that opened for Isabella were not only physical, but also symbolic. The young woman discovered a universe where she could express herself, create, and positively influence the lives of other people. This discovery gave meaning to his trajectory and fueled a greater purpose, which transcended simple personal success. With each step taken, the girl who once faced the deepest pain began to leave her mark on the world, showing that transformation is possible when the will to change overcomes the limits imposed by life. Isabella, now graduated and an entrepreneur, consolidated an identity that combined strength, intelligence, and empathy. His story was a silent invitation for others to believe in the power of change and the importance of support that goes beyond the superficial. The young woman knew that her journey would still have many chapters, but she faced each one of them with the courage and wisdom acquired over the years. The victory of determination was not just a personal milestone, but a powerful message about what can be achieved when the dream is fueled by action and commitment. This new phase of Isabella's life was a result of a profound transformation, which began in the rescue of the shelter and was driven by the belief of a mentor and the strength of education. The degree in business administration was just one of the many achievements that reflected his ability to overcome the past and build a promising future. The sustainable technology company, in turn, represented the materialization of an ideal that sought to unite innovation and social responsibility, expanding the positive impact that Isabella wanted to have on the world. The pride he felt was not limited to personal achievements, but extended to the reach that his story could have on other lives. With each project developed, with each solution presented, the young entrepreneur confirmed that the changes she managed to promote in herself could reverberate beyond her own universe. Isabella transformed the pain of the past into fuel for a bright future, showing that true victory lies in the ability to transform adversity into achievements and opportunities. Thus, Isabella's journey followed its course, marked by firm and decisive steps. The journey from the darkest moments to construction of a life of success and purpose showed the strength that is born from overcoming and genuine support. The young administrator and entrepreneur began to walk a path that united knowledge, passion, and commitment, a path that revealed the power to rewrite stories and inspire transformations. Isabella's return to Texas was not driven by resentment or desire for revenge, but by a deep, transformative courage. When she returned to that city that had once been the scene of her pain and abandonment, she carried not only the marks of a difficult past, but also the strength of someone who knew how to transform suffering into an impulse for change. Each step she took towards the streets she had known in childhood was loaded with a greater meaning, that of confronting her own memories and giving a purpose to those experiences that marked her so much. This return represented more than a simple reunion with the past. It was the beginning of a journey to expose hidden truths, to illuminate dark corners where injustices still lurked, and to be the voice of those who, as she once was, had no power to defend themselves. Isabella knew that the path she chose would not be easy. Returning to the place where she was abused and where her childhood was stolen meant opening old wounds and facing ghosts that many prefer to forget. But what moved her was not the desire to relive the pain, but the firm commitment to use it as a tool to fight against a cycle of violence that still threatened so many children. It did not seek revenge against specific individuals. Its focus was on bringing to light the mechanisms that allowed these atrocities to continue hidden behind closed doors, protected by silence, fear, and institutional neglect. Their mission was clear: to transform personal pain into social action, to act so that other voices could be heard and that suffering did not remain invisible. Isabella's experience has made her a tireless advocate for children's rights and a symbol of resistance against child abuse. With the knowledge acquired in her academic career and the emotional maturity developed over the years, she began to articulate strategies to mobilize society, authorities, and institutions in order to combat this problem effectively. He believed that confronting the past should be a process not only of personal healing, but also of real contribution to the transformation of the structures that allowed abuse. Thus, his presence in Texas gained symbolic and practical weight, a bridge between the lived experience and the struggle for justice and protection. Isabella's engagement has taken many forms, from participating in awareness campaigns to collaborating with organizations dedicated to the support and protection of children at risk. She became an active voice in public debates, sharing her story with the intention of raising awareness and educating, showing that silence and omission are powerful allies of violence. Her courage inspired others to break through fear and isolation, fostering a support network that helped victims find ways out of the abusive situation. More than a survivor, Isabella took on the role of protagonist in the fight for human rights and social justice. The resumption of contact with Texas also brought intense emotional challenges. Revisiting the sites where the violence happened required a constant effort to balance painful memories with the determination that your work would make a difference. Isabella learned to channel these emotions to strengthen her mission, understanding that facing the past was a way to prevent other children from going through the same suffering. This posture reflected maturity that overcame trauma, showing that true strength is not in avoiding pain, but in facing it head-on and using it to generate transformation. In addition, Isabella began to invest in projects aimed at preventing child abuse, collaborating with schools, government agencies, and social entities. Its goal was to create safe environments where children could grow up protected and where signs of abuse were detected early and treated with the necessary seriousness. With her experience, she helped train professionals trained to identify and act in these situations, promoting a cultural change that aimed to end the naturalization of violence against children. Each small achievement in this field represented a step forward in the construction of a more just and humane society. The impact of Isabella's presence in Texas began to be felt not only in specialized circles, but also in the community at large. Her story and work gained space in the local media, expanding the reach of the message and strengthening the network of protection for children. This recognition has brought new resources, partnerships, and opportunities to expand actions and deepen awareness work. The young woman who was once silenced by fear now became a leader who used her voice to break the silence and mobilize concrete change. Throughout this process, Isabella continued to learn and grow, both personally and professionally. The experience in Texas reaffirmed the value of confrontation as a path to overcoming and building a legacy that went beyond itself. Each challenge faced turned into a lesson, and each victory fueled the hope of a future where child abuse was less and less common and more effectively combated. The young entrepreneur, administrator, and activist showed that the pain of the past can turn into a powerful force when channeled into the greater good. Thus, Isabella's return to the place where it all began was not a simple trip to the past, but the beginning of a new stage of her journey, marked by her commitment to justice, protection, and the defense of children. Her story revealed that facing the past with courage does not mean carrying the weight of pain forever, but using it as an engine for change and for building a safer and more welcoming world. This new phase was a maximum expression of resilience and the power of transformation, showing that the true reunion with one's own history happens when one decides to act in favor of those who still need to be protected. In this context, Isabella's strength became a light in the midst of the darkness that still surrounds child abuse, an inspiration for all who believe in the possibility of a future where childhood is respected and preserved. His trajectory showed that, even in the face of the greatest adversity, it is possible to transform suffering into action, pain into hope, and the past into a present that builds new stories. The return to Texas was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a struggle that would continue to grow, driven by the unbreakable will to make a difference in the lives of those who still needed a voice to break free. Getting this far means that the story touched you in some way, that it made sense, and maybe it lit a light for something important. It is precisely for those who are present like this, attentive and open, that the space exists, to share trajectories that inspire and show that, even in the most difficult circumstances, there are possible paths to transformation. If this story of Isabella moved you, how about leaving a sign here in the comments? Something simple like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was to me," already helps us feel this connection we've built together. And if you felt that this content really added, it gives you a boost by leaving that like that in a natural way, reaffirms the bond created throughout the video. Here, the idea is to walk together, bringing more stories and learning that, in some way, can become part of your own journey. That's why there's a video on the side that tells a similar story, full of challenges and overcomings. Click and stay with me there. It will be nice to have you follow every step. Isabella's trajectory did not end. She remains firm in her current mission, which is to transform pain into justice. Today, she is an engaged activist, an active voice in campaigns against child abuse, a strong woman who supports victims, and uses her influence to change realities, inside and outside the business world. Her story is a powerful wake-up call, but also an invitation to hope and action, showing that giving up is never an option, even in the face of the worst of times. And it is this strength, this determination, that continues to inspire thousands of people to believe in the possibility of rebuilding their lives and helping to build a better future for all.